you want to look at?
5 and 6.
All right. All right. What do I do first? What's up? Yeah, square both sides. So the square cancels the square root. And then what do I do with the x plus 5 squared? Okay. So when I do that, I get that, right? Okay, now what? Okay. So I'm going to add the 2x over and then subtract the 44 over. Did I write down the wrong problem here? Yeah. There we go. Are you happy to hear? All right. So now we need to solve this quadratic. How do you want to solve it? You want to use the quadratic formula? All right. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right. So when I do that, I get 18 plus or minus 10. So if I split that up, when I add it, I have 28 over 2, or 14. And when I subtract, I get 8 over 2, or 4. And then I need to check those. The 14 will check out, and the 4 does not. Okay? Just FYI, I would have factored this, because it just -7 and -8 multiply to give you 56 and add to give you -15. Would have been a little bit less work maybe than the formula, but the formula's fine. Okie majoke. You had a second one you had said though?
No, it's okay.
You're okay?
Yeah.
Okay. If you're okay, I'm okay. Okay. Who else has questions from this? Luis, did you had said something that you wanted to look at? 8, you said? Okay. And what did you want to do first here? Let's cancel out the fourth power, or the fourth root with a fourth power. And then 2x to the fourth is 2 to the fourth times x to the fourth. So that's 16 x to the fourth. So this is a polynomial. To solve any polynomial equation, I have to get it equal to 0. So I'm going to add the 8x squared over and subtract the 3 over. Now this is a degree 4 polynomial. That's a bummer. But it's only got 3 terms, and it happens to be in the quadratic form because it's a degree 4 term, a degree 2 term, and then a constant term. So I can just factor this like I would a quadratic. So since the leading coefficient isn't 1, I need to find the 2 numbers that multiply to give me the leading coefficient times the constant term. Olivia, for you. And then add to give me that middle term. Hopefully you can see that the 2 numbers that are going to do that are 12 and negative 4. So I'm going to replace the 8x squared with 12x squared plus negative 4x squared, and then make 2 groups. From the first group, we can take a greatest common factor of 4x squared. Oops, that was 16x to the 4th. Leaving me with 4x squared plus 3. From the second group, I can take out a negative 1, leaving me with 4x squared plus 3. Since each factor, or each term contains a factor of 4x squared plus 3, I can factor that off. And the leftovers then would be 4x squared minus 1. And now I can set each of these equal to 0 and solve them separately. To solve each one of these quadratics, I would solve them directly because I just have x squareds. I don't have any x's, so I can just kind of go at it directly. So the first one, I'll subtract 3 and then divide by 4. And when I square root both sides, I get plus or minus the square root of negative 3/4. When I'm square rooting a negative, what does that create? It creates an imaginary. We're not worried about those in this situation. Since this is non-real, we're just going to discard it. On to the other one, so I'll do the same thing. I'm going to add 1 over and then divide by 4. When I square root both sides, I get plus or minus the square root of 1/4. The square root of 1 is 1, and the square root of 4 is 2, so I have a positive 1/4 and a negative, positive 1/2 and a negative 1/2. And if I go and I check these, the negative 1/2 doesn't work, but the positive 1/2 will. So the 4th power, that degree 4 polynomial looked scary, but it was just really a quadratic problem. Still could be done the same way. But that was a first semester thing that we kind of pulled out of our hat there. It's been a minute since we've had to deal with something like that. So, but this is why we spent really a lot of time dealing with polynomials, because many of these different kinds of equations really boil down to a polynomial equation in the end. So they're very important that we're able to deal with those effectively. Other questions from this assignment? 11? Sure. Okay. So the first thing I'd want to do is isolate one of the 2 radicals. On the right-hand side, the x square root x plus 5 is already isolated. So I don't have anything to do there. So now I'm just going to square both sides to cancel that radical. However, on the left-hand side, because I have this plus 1 here, I can't just cancel the radical. What I'm going to have happen over here is I'm going to have to FOIL this out. Okay with that, Zutong? Okay, so square root 3x minus 8 times square root 3x minus 8 is just 3x minus 8. The square root times 1 is square root 3x minus 8. 1 times the square root is square root 3x minus 8. And 1 times 1 is 1. And if I combine my like terms, I get 3x minus 7 plus 2 square root 3x minus 8. And what I'm going to do now is isolate the second radical. So I'm going to move everything onto the other side. So I'll subtract the 3x and then add the 7. And then we'll divide the 2. And now I'll square both sides again. So again, on the right-hand side, I had to FOIL there, right? Which gives me this, and this is quadratic, so I'm going to just move everything onto one side. So that's going to give me minus 15x plus 44. And this is, you could solve by the quadratic formula, or you could factor this. So this would factor to x minus 11 and x minus 4. So when I set each of those equal to 0 and solve, I get positive 11 and positive 4. But I still need to check these. The 11 will not check out, but the positive 4 does. Is that okay there? Do you need to see the checking or anything? Are we okay with that? Sure. Yeah, so when we check this, I'm just going to use my calculator to do this because it's just should be pretty quick. I'm going back to the original problem, and I'm going to plug 11 in for the left-hand side and then 11 in for the right-hand side, and just make sure that they agree. So like 3 times 11 minus 8, and then plus 1 gave me 6. And when I do it to the other side, I get 4. Since the two sides don't agree, I know that 11 is not actually an answer. And then I would do this, repeat the same process for the 4, and that one does work. Okay with that? And again, you don't have to write down any of the checks. You can just do it on your calculator. You just need to remember to do it, right? And if it doesn't work out, just cross it out. If it does, put a box around it, and that's good enough. Anyone else? Questions from this assignment? Okie dokie. Can I have you guys take out a separate sheet of paper and your calculator and clear your desks of everything else? Don't act like by now you didn't know that this was coming. All the other classes would have spoiled this for you by now.
My grade kind of got down pretty heavily.
Don't worry about anything until after class.
Alright.
So like I put M's in, like I put an M already in for this homework quiz because I'm going to get them and I'm going to grade them, and then I'll put a new score over top of it. So like that's why the grade changed. So just like, you know what I mean? Like I'm just, I enter them all in, and then when I get the grades, I fill them in over top of it. So like,
Okay, my grade dropped like 7%. I was like, well,
yeah, that's all that's happened. It's just that there's a missing in as the homework quiz right now. And you can't see the homework quiz right now because it's not set to display until later.